they wouldn't be hugging, but expect a few hugs and a firm handshake between the two leaders before they head into that room where the two will sit and have a restricted dialogue for about half an hour to 40 minutes, after which delegation-level talks will follow. And then there would be the press statements where questions are not being taken, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi certainly will be hosting the visiting dignitaries to a beautiful lunch where there'd be Indian classical music playing at the background. So a lot of arrangements in place. We've not seen Prime Minister Narendra Modi really inspect the arrival ceremonies of a visiting dignitary to the extent that he's done in this visit.
Okay, stay with me, Geeta. Gaurav, I just wanted to, pick up on one of those aspects that Geeta just mentioned. The Prime Minister right there at the vehicle to receive and accompany the President and the First Lady. An unusual gesture, if I'm not mistaken. This is another signal of that warmth?
So the Prime Minister does extend personal courtesy and he attaches a lot of importance to these relationships. When it comes to Donald Trump, this is India investing in a relationship. Remember, he's invested extensively in virtually every major head of state or government who come to India for the simple reason, Shiv, like we were discussing, India is the country that's very close to two countries that may not be friends at all. For example, China, Xi Jinping and US, Donald Trump. Or look at the amount of investment in the French president or Vladimir Putin. So Prime Minister indulges in a lot of this to send out that message that this relationship means a lot to me, to my country, to my people, and to our future, Shiv.
Absolutely. It's important. The symbolism is indistinguishable from the transactional nature of this relationship. Of course, there is a very strong view that this is not a transactional relationship. It is far more nuanced than that. There are far more important, inextricable interlinkages between India and the United States, especially the people-to-people contact, the defense relationship, which is going to find a manifestation in just a few minutes from now with two large military helicopter deals being signed by India for the Indian Navy and the Indian Army. We'll tell you more about those, and of course you heard about that first. I also want to welcome onto our coverage Pathikrit Sanyal, who's a well-known strategic affairs expert with us. As we get these images live from Hyderabad House, Pathikrit, the two big helicopter deals that are going to be signed, those are military hardware deals. That's something you can touch and feel. It is for the for the Indian Armed Forces. But the strategic relationship between the India and the United States goes well beyond being just a buyer-seller relationship, doesn't it?
Absolutely, Shiv. And one of the reasons why the President Trump administration has been investing in this relation is because President Trump and the US administration wants India to play a much bigger role in the Indo-Pacific region, and they know that if there is one country which can stand as a counter to China, that is definitely India. And so even if you look at the deal of this MH-60 helicopter, that is primarily an anti-submarine warfare helicopter, which would keep an eye on the loitering submarines which nowadays keep on coming from China towards the Indian Ocean region. But so far as the strategic aspect of it is concerned, look, I'll give you an example. We bought the S-400 from Russia, and the other country which actually bought it was Turkey. Turkey was given sanctions by United States for buying it from Russia because Russia is under the CAATSA sanctions, Counter American Adversaries to Sanctions Act. Now, in case of India, they did not impose any sanction. Credit goes to the Modi administration for actually explaining it to the Americans that we can't give up Russian hardware or the Russian spares because there is a legacy issue of whatever weapon systems we have which are of Russian origin. The Americans understood that if there has to be a certain amount of military preparedness for India perpetually, then they can't expect India to completely give up or disown Russia altogether. And that's the reason we do not have any kind of sanctions in spite of taking S-400 from Russia.
Yes.
That's one part of it. The other part is definitely when we went for the Balakot airstrike. When we talk about the strategic aspect, the takeaway part, there are 4 things which happened in the last 2 years which don't get generally mentioned. We entered the MTCR club during the Trump era, Missile Technology Control Regime. We were made part of Australia Group. We were made part of Wassenaar Arrangement, and we were accorded Strategic Trade Authorization Level 1 which means we get more critical, defense and nuclear technology today than what we were getting probably a decade back. So all these are very critical steps which were actually taken during the Trump era, which shows that it is not just the transactional aspect of the business, but something more. Definitely there has to be something related to defense and physical hardware, because there is a business aspect to it also. But again, I'll just tell you one thing. The importance of the word tough negotiator, if we look at it from the defense aspect also, President Trump also knows that there are certain critical defense systems that India would be willing to take from the United States, including, which you had mentioned in one of your programs, the NASAMS 2 or the armed drones. But they also know that if they try to push some of the products like F-21, which is nothing but an upgraded version of F-16 or the F-15XEX that they're trying to sell it, then India would take one step back and see what is in India's interest and then do it accordingly. Today, America knows that India is a multi-aligned country. We are a strategic partner of the United States, but that does not mean that India would give up its right to have a strong relation with either China or Russia and even France. And that's where I think India has been given that concession by the Americans. If you see what this language that President Trump used against Germany for spending less on NATO, he said that Germany is a captive of Russia.
Absolutely.
We did not receive that kind of statement. So in spite of not having a trade deal, in spite of buying Rafale instead of any American weapon systems, if the President of the United States comes and says that we have a natural, beautiful, enduring friendship and that Americans love, respect and would always be loyal and faithful to India, that means they're investing more in the strategic relationship, which is not just transaction. Transaction would always happen.
No, this is a unifying theme that we are getting from all our experts today, and I would agree with it wholeheartedly. This is far from a transactional relationship. Of course, there are transactions. Yes, there are multi-billion-dollar transactions, but those don't color the relationship and make them transactional, because there's way too much else that is both tangible and intangible that is not necessarily transactional. Gaurav, the very important point that Patikrit just made, about the S-400 sanctions on Turkey, the tensions between the US and Russia on that aspect, that never, fully translated into any kind of action under CAATSA or any other provisions of the of US law on India, which is in many ways a validation of India's autonomy, India's independence of strategic policy, and how India is seen very differently from, other so-called countries like Turkey and Pakistan.
Shiv, India has invested very heavily in our partners in defense and also engaging with partners. I've had interactions with top diplomats who said there was a lot of pressure on India to not go ahead with the S-400s. But the Indian Air Force stuck to its guns. Indian Air Force convinced the government, and then the government was able to convince the Americans that S-400 is required. We really value our relationship with the Americans. We love $20 billion worth of defense hardware. We are looking at much more, but not at the cost of Russians. We also need the S-400s, and that was a deal that was in the works for a much longer period, and it's only being inked now when sanctions have come in. So it predates those sanctions, and the Americans were convinced why we require those for India's national defense. Again, the point that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Shiv, repeatedly makes, that India is not non-aligned. As government sources tell India today, we are multi-aligned now, and we look forward to protecting our interests the best and serving peace across the world. That's the point that Prime Minister Narendra Modi also made at Motera yesterday. 21st century, new decade. In this new decade, there are new alignments that are coming up where we shape not just Indo-Pacific, but peace across the world.
Not a transactional relationship, a strategic connection between the two countries that stretches far beyond just military hardware. I also want to welcome J.K. Tripathi, former diplomat, onto our coverage this morning here. Mr. Tripathi, welcome. First of all, the Hyderabad House phase, which is very important because this is where the restricted dialogue will take place. This is where, the deal making, I don't want to make it sound like deal making, but this is where the deals will at least be signed. Memorandums of understanding will also take place. And then the all important press statement will come out a little later. This is something, before you joined our coverage, I asked our other experts about what they were hoping to see on this joint statement at the end of what happens in Hyderabad House. What would you say, sir? What would you be happy with to see mentioned in today's press statement?
Well, I would like to see the strategic partnership mentioned, combating the terrorism, that has to be mentioned. And I would certainly like to see something about H1B1 visa, if any sort of respite that is given to us by USA.
Very important issue.
Plus, our relationship with Iran. Now that US has under CAATSA, US has asked us and we obliged.
Yes.
I mean, severing all the oil imports from Iran. But as Pratikrit has already said, that it has been very, very tough standing by us. Like we obliged that we won't take any oil from Iran, but Chabahar, we were able to have the Chabahar project kept out of this CAATSA preview.
Yes.
And then now I would like to see something more on Iran that we are able to snatch from USA.
Right.
That probably maybe in a limited quantity or in certain quantity of gas we are able to get these imports from Iran. That is very, very much what I want. Yes, as comes trade, I don't think, as everybody thinks, that there won't be any
Not
big
on this
trade
visit,
deal.
yes.
But yes, some smaller concessions perhaps USA can give to us, and maybe on some smaller points we can also give some concessions to US. That is what I think it should be.
I just want to pick up on the visa issue that you mentioned, Mr. Tripathi, and bring in Akshay Mathur in on that. Akshay, the visa issue has been an area of, some friction over the years. Why hasn't it been sorted out already? One would imagine that with the level of exchanges that we have with the United States, that, visa issues should have been priority for sorting out. What are you hearing? What do you think will happen?
Look, immigration and any kind of immigration nowadays, especially to any Western country in Europe and in Japan and the United States, has become very, very controversial. India is already one of the largest beneficiaries of the H-1B system. That has been a consistent demand from the Indian industry to enable more H-1B visas. In fact, some of the reports are now indicating that our requests for H-1B visas have also dropped by 30 to 40% in the last 4 to 5 years, because the American companies are now not only being pressurized to hire, but also are trying to hire more Americans in their own firms, because they have to scale in the United States and they can't do it only by exporting Indian professionals from here. And if you notice the kind of invitations that have come to Indian CEOs that are meeting Trump, many of them are actually Indian industrialists that have significant operations in the United States. So the visa issues remains important, but I don't think it's going to get solved anytime soon. And also the nature of the digital economy is also changing. A lot more work can now be done internationally. Sriram was explaining, the kind of meetings we are having on digital economy with Mike Zuckerberg, etc., and how Bangalore is connected. Absolutely bang on. We really need to focus on digital economy. It's an important part of Tata's and the TCS and Infosys. But please also keep in mind that on important global digital issues, the India and United States don't actually have consensus. We are not in agreement. So, for instance, if you look at the e-commerce negotiations at the WTO, we're not in agreement with the United States and the European Union. If you look at the free flow of data conversations that are taking place at G20, we're not in agreement. If you look at digital, the taxation of digital multinationals like Facebook and Amazon, we're not in agreement. So we really have to focus. We have to understand that we're not in agreement.
Akshay, I'm going to pick on each one of those areas of friction, whether it comes to e-commerce or those other aspects you mentioned where India and the US are not in agreement, while also focusing on the areas of convergence, because it's very important that both sides be aware of these issues of divergence so that things can actually become stronger. The symbolism is there, the messaging is there, the atmosphere is most certainly there in dollops. We'll see what happens in this very important phase. Quick break here on our coverage, but don't go anywhere. When you come back, we'll tell you all about the big deals being signed by Modi and Trump there at Hyderabad House. Back after this.